Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so delighted you've joined me for another story tonight, because it's a pleasure to have you with me again. And lots of love to all of you. So before we get started with today's story, go and get yourself something lovely to drink. And if it's unusual, let me know about the drink, because I'm always fascinated with what everybody drinks out there. And you will be amazed at the variety of drinks that people enjoy. And so let's continue. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Growing up, my father was one of the most quietly conservative people you could ever hope to meet. He was exceedingly reserved, and never really said even boo to a goose. He was one of the general managers for an all-American bank, and was so incredibly successful, he had enabled the bank to make billions of dollars due to his ingenious ideas. But back in those days, let's just say people weren't rewarded so much financially, as they are indeed now, especially when they accomplish so much. Even so, at the time we enjoyed a very high standard of living, and never wanted for very much, although I would never have described us as wealthy. My mother had always been a stay-at-home mother, and had never been remotely ambitious. She had old-fashioned values, and thoroughly enjoyed spending time at home with her children, and taking care of the entire family. She believed there was no tougher job in the entire world than raising your younglings from the moment that they were born. And I believe she was right about that. She considered her job as a mother both a privilege and a pleasure, and wanted to enjoy every stage of our development, from when we uttered our first word, walked our first step, and when we graduated from high school. My mother had a lively, bubbly, effervescent personality, so the cheerful clothes she wore definitely reflected her zealous passion for life. People genuinely warmed to my mother. Even growing up, the kids in my year at school would always say they wished they had a mother like her, as she was pretty special. And even when I was a youngster, I certainly appreciated how fortunate I was to have a mother that was there for us all the time, especially when we grazed our knee, or needed her salient advice about something. My parents were as opposite as chalk is to cheese, but I believe that is why their relationship worked so well, as dare I say opposites definitely attract. And my parents absolutely adored the bones of each other, and they brought out the best in each other in what I believe was a perfect balance of yin and yang energy. Ostensibly, I think my very serious, solemn father needed someone bright and cheery like my mother to bring him out of his shell, and she did just that with a seemingly effortless ease. My reserved father was one of the most principled men you could ever hope to meet. He was a man of character. He was chivalrous, charming, and from a very young age, I knew I wanted to grow up and be exactly like him. He was the kind of steadfastly dependent man you could quite literally trust with your life, for he would never let you down or betray your trust. And in my opinion, that is a real man for you, in every sense of the word. I very much doubt that in my father's life there had ever been any other woman other than my mother. For my dad was as faithful and as loyal as the kind of dogs you sometimes hear about, that lie across their owners' graves after their owners die, because they were so incredibly attached to that beloved person in life, and want to remain close to them, even after they are gone from this world. My father was so devotedly loyal to my mother, that indeed if anyone had told my mother that my father was having an affair or cheating on her, she'd have found the very idea nonsensical and hysterically funny, and wouldn't have believed a single word of it. She would have known it would not be true, in the same way you wouldn't believe an unfit person if they told you that the previous week they had climbed the Himalayas. There is no way on God's earth that my father would so much have given another woman a fleeting glance, for he only ever had eyes for my mother. Even if a pretty woman had passed my father in the supermarket, I can assure you he wouldn't have batted an eyelid, nor would he have noticed them. That was how immune he was to the attractiveness of other women. And honestly, it made me look on my father with a wondrous awe, because his integrity was completely unblemished by the provocative influences of our very sexualized world. As a consequence of my father's devout loyalty, I grew up in a very stable home, where I always felt safe and incredibly secure, as the spiritual roots of our family life, although not physically discernible, were made from very firm, solid foundations that could not be rocked. My father was as faithful and devoted to us as a male lion is towards his entire pride, ensuring no harm comes to any one of his family. For let's just say a male lion will fight to the death to protect his pride, and my father was exactly like that. Of course, I was aware of how lucky I was to have such a solid family life, because there were children at the school I attended whose families had broken up as one partner had been unfaithful to the other, and they had fallen out of love with each other. The relationship had collapsed, rather like a shaky camping chair that couldn't hold itself up for a very long time before coming apart. When my father learnt about some of these sad stories from my school of kids whose parents were getting divorced, he would describe those stories as tragic, as he considered all relationships between men and women to be precious, so if they fell apart, he believed they were flimsy in the first place. My father consisted of me. My name is Ernest, my younger brother William, who was 2 years younger than I was, my mother Mary, and my dad, of course. His name was Peter. Peter means rock, and yes, my father was indeed the rock of our family, so his name was very apt. My grandmother said when my father was born, she took one look at him and said, "He is Peter," for she knew that he would grow up to be the kind of man that would never let you down, and that was my father for you. I unfortunately didn't know much about my father's early years in his life, when he was a boy, although my dad was so attached to his roots that we were being raised in the same part of the world where he grew up, in Washington State. We lived close to the town of Leavenworth, which is a charming Bavarian village in Cheatham County that is nestled in the picturesque Cascade Mountains. The town itself has a reasonably small populace and is known for its unique architecture. My father was raised in my grandmother's home, not far from where we lived, in a rural location, surrounded by country roads, tall lofty trees, and the silhouettes of the glorious mountains, which we would embrace every single day. We were lucky that my father would take a 5-hour flight from Leavenworth to his job in Washington quite regularly, and the flights didn't bother him in the slightest, as he got so much work done on board the plane on the commute, and it didn't bother him at all. Sometimes he worked from home, handling negotiations for the bank, and it was pretty cool when he was around. But even when he was working from home, he dressed up as if he was going to the office, as my father was very formal in that regard, and said you couldn't be taking your job seriously if you were dressed sloppily. Our family had always been very close, so growing up me and my brother would cycle down the country lanes together to get to my grandparents' house. We practically lived 10 minutes away from each other, and as kids we enjoyed hanging around my grandparents' place. My father, being very reticently reserved by nature, was not very forthcoming about his childhood, and I guess I'd never actually asked my grandparents what he was like as a boy. I had of course seen photographs of my father around their farmhouse, as my grandmother had lots of family pictures displayed liberally around the place, including pictures of me and my brother when we were very young. Sometimes when I looked at these photographs, I felt as if I was looking at a picture of myself. Even my grandmother said it was uncanny that I was the splitting image of my father. I had his dark brown hair and a rather broad face, with very blue piercing eyes. But unfortunately, like my father, I'd also inherited his rather bad eyesight, so regrettably I had to wear glasses every day, much like he did. My brother William, on the other hand, looked much more like my mother's father, with his curly blonde hair and his blue eyes. But he also had great eyesight, so he didn't have the handicap of having to wear glasses daily, that had become the bane of my life from an early age. Although I will admit my grandmother did tell me that the glasses I wore accentuated my blue eyes, I believed her. My grandmother never said anything just to be kind, or something she didn't mean. On one unassuming day, my father took our family by surprise when he did share an unorthodox, outlandish story with all of us about something that had happened to him in his teenage years, when he was round about the same age as me and my brother were at the time. His story rarely impacted me and my brother's lives so very much, as being teenagers, we were naturally always looking for an adventure. It all began on an ordinary Friday night, when our family was fast asleep in our beds. All of a sudden, from what had been a peaceful slumber, without anybody stirring in our household, there came a loud, urgent rapping at our front door. It sounded as if someone was hitting our door down with a baseball bat. That was how disturbing the sound was. I cannot remember a time in my young life when I was so startled, so much so that I was abruptly woken from my sleep. I remember sitting up on my bed, feeling somewhat bewildered and disturbed, thinking, what the hell is that? My whole body began to shake like a rattle as the banging persisted, almost as if whoever was outside our door would likely break it down if we didn't open it. The disruptive, unsettling noise made my blood run cold, as all kind of weird scenarios began to wildly play out in my mind. It sounded as if the Grim Reaper was standing at our door. My first base instinct was to crawl under my bed and hide away, as pathetic as that may sound, but I didn't do that. I was sure that our front door would be kicked down in any second, and this insidious individual, whoever he was, probably with a pickaxe in his hand, would be after us, like in one of those horror movies you watch, only this was being played out in real time. I was absolutely certain that whoever was at the front door was dangerously predatory, even though we lived in an area uncontaminated by crime. But it's hard to explain just how terrifying that knock at the door actually was, when your imagination is in overdrive. It didn't help, of course, that me and my brother William, at the time, were completely fixated by horror movies, and we loved watching them. So their harrowing influences over our fertile imaginations didn't exactly serve us very well. "Who is at the door, Dad?" asked my brother William in a trembling voice. He had run into my parents' bedroom, with me close behind him. We nervously watched my father climb out of bed in his blue and white pinstripe pyjamas, wrapping himself in his red and black tartan dressing gown, while he slipped his feet into his blue slippers. My mother had practically jumped out of bed in alarm, as if someone had hit her with a slingshot. She was flapping like a distressed pigeon, and nervously putting on her pale pink dressing gown and her fluffy pink slippers. I could see there was a discernible fear written in her eyes. "I don't know, son, who's at the door," said my father, "but I'm about to find out. But I wish they wouldn't keep banging like that. It's very disturbing." "Please, please, Dad, don't open the door," said my brother, looking affrighted. He was reaching out to hold my father back with his arm. "Supposing, Dad, that there's a bad man at the door who wants to blow off our heads with his shotgun. You hear stories, don't you, Dad? He could be deranged. He could be a lunatic. He could be from a mental asylum." "Son, we don't live in the Wild West," said my father, with a slight irritation that was discernible in his voice. "You kids shouldn't watch so many horror movies, should you? Their influences on your imagination are not good. Someone is pounding at the door and I've got to answer it, and I'm quite sure it's not the Grim Reaper." My mother was still trembling like a leaf. She looked decidedly nervous. "Oh, Peter, please don't answer the door," she said. "The kids are right. I don't have a good feeling about this. Anybody could be out there. I mean, no one comes banging at your door at this insane hour of the morning, do they? Something is decidedly wrong, and I don't like it at all." My father ignored my mother and my brother's anguished protestations, while I just bit my lip so hard that the blood began to trickle down my throat. I could taste the salty metallic overload on my tongue, which wasn't at all pleasant. "Don't overreact, darling," said my father. "We won't know who's at the door if we don't answer it, will we? And don't worry, I've taken precautions. I have a hunting rifle with me. So if someone is standing at the door with ill intent, who means to harm him, I'll blow his head off first before he gets to hurt any one of us. But I am quite sure you're overreacting, and that our visitor is benevolent." My father's words did not serve to comfort or reassure any of us, but there was no arguing with him, so we all just shut up. My father reached for his hunting rifle and trotted easily down the stairs, taking charge of things as he always did so stoically. There was nothing in his demeanour that suggested he was even a tad concerned about our nightly visitor, but that was my father for you. Nothing ever ruffled his feathers. He was made of tough stuff. My mother whispered under her breath, "Who is at the door at this time of night?" I could hear the fear in her voice. I glanced very briefly at the clock in the hallway. It was 3:30 in the morning. You've got to be kidding. I knew my mother was absolutely right. No one in their right mind should be knocking at our front door at this insane hour of the morning, and I just wished that my father and me and my brother would return to bed, dive under our covers, and just pretend none of this had happened. Instead, I stood there, rather bemused, I have to say, gormlessly waiting to see what would happen next, and fearing for the very worst. My stoic father was completely unflappable, and continued to tell my mother to calm down and to stay back as he reached for the front door. My father stood at the door for a moment and called out, "Who is it?" "It's me, Peter," came a squeaky voice. "It's Anita Sanderson." I recognized the female voice at once, although the voice sounded frightened. It was our next-door neighbour, Mrs. Sanderson, who lived in the nearest farmhouse to ours. But what on earth was she doing here at this ungodly time of the morning, were the first thoughts that were anchoring themselves in my mind. "Are you all right, Anita?" asked my father, immediately opening the front door to let the terrified woman in. Anita was shaking like a leaf. She looked nervously behind her shoulders, as if she thought something might be there, and then she scrambled rather awkwardly into our house, like a frightened rabbit, and brought in with her a blast of icy cold air that was extremely chilly. She looked dishevelled. There were leaves and twigs in her hair, mud on her chin, and scratches all over her face. Her nightdress was ripped in parts. She was wearing a pair of slippers that were once fluffy, but no longer was that the case, for they were covered in mud. In truth, she looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. There was fear in her eyes, so from her disquieted expression and her nervous temperamental movements, I knew something bad must have happened for her to arrive at our house in such a state, but I couldn't think what it was that could have caused her such obvious distress. But I was about to find out about that, and what she was going to tell me would shake me to the core. My mother took Anita into her arms and spoke to her lovingly, like you would reassure a child that has just woken up from a terrible nightmare. "It's going to be all right, Anita. Honestly, relax, look at you. You're shaking all over. Calm down. Breathe in very slowly. I can get you a brown paper bag if you like. Take deep breaths. That's right, that's it. Now tell us, what's going on? Why are you so distressed? What are you doing here at this ungodly hour of the morning? What has happened to you? Look at your clothes, and look at your face. You're all scratched up." Anita couldn't say anything. It was almost as if her tongue was tied for a moment, and all she could do was mumble under her breath, but her words were so muted we could barely hear anything she was saying. "I'm sorry, Anita, but you're going to have to speak out. I can't hear a word you're saying. You're in such a dreadful state, dear. I've never seen you like this before." "Darling, I think it's best you take Anita into the kitchen. She's in no state to talk. She's shaking all over. Make her a hot chocolate with some brandy in it. She looks like she's had a nasty shock of some kind. I'm sure the brandy will give her some Dutch courage." Before long my mother had a kettle on, and was making mugs of hot chocolate for us all, while we gathered around Mrs. Sanderson eagerly, like a flock of geese, to hear what she had to say, for we could not comprehend what could have possibly shaken her so much that she had been banging on our door in the middle of the night and woken our entire family up. The first thing my father said is, "Ralph didn't do this to you, did he, Anita?" My father's eyes were looking at all the scratches on Anita's arms and face, and there was an appalled expression on his face, as if he was suddenly wondering if Anita Sanderson had been a victim of abuse and run to our house in the middle of the night. It would seem the very suggestion from my father that Anita's husband Rolf may have laid a hand on her brought Anita out of her shell, rather like a hermit crab that is being poked with a stick by a child. She quickly leapt to her husband's defence, and finally she managed to find her voice, that had been lost for a moment. She said, "Good Lord, no! Ralph would never lay a finger on me. My husband's a very good man. Anyway, if you must know, he's not here. He's away at an agricultural show at the moment. I'm at home alone. My children are staying with their grandparents. If you must know, I got scratched up in the woods. That's all. It was so dreadfully dark in there, so very frightening. I couldn't see where I was going, even though I had my torch with me. I was running into trees and thorny briars. That's why I got badly scratched up. I also fell down a few times, which is why my nightdress is all ripped up. Some of the paths in there are riddled with burgeoning roots, you know. It's very easy to lose your footing. I tripped a few times. It was that thing I was running from. That grotesque thing. You have no idea. I thought it was going to get me. I really did. I thought he was going to kill me. I thought I was going to die." By all accounts, it would appear that the brandy and the hot chocolate had done a remarkable job in making Anita suddenly make sense. Her words were coming out fluidly, but rather fast, like a garden hose that has a life force of its own and is hard to hold on to. She seemed so rattled by something, but at least we could make sense of what she was saying. My first thought, which I'm quite sure was shared with my father, my brother and my mother, was what the hell had Anita been doing in the woods in the early hours of the morning like this? And what was this grotesque thing that she claimed was chasing her? "What exactly happened, Anita? None of anything you're saying is making any sense to me. I mean, you're all scratched up. You're in a dreadful state. You say something was chasing you?" "Oh, I was definitely chased by this monstrous thing. There are no words to describe it to you. But it's a long story. It's hard to explain what happened, because in truth I'm not exactly sure. It's all such a fog now. I had a glass of wine tonight before I went to bed. Well, maybe a little more than I would normally have," she said, blushing, her cheeks going red, as if admitting to indulging in too much drink was more than a little embarrassing for her to have to admit. "It's just, you see, when Ralph's away from home, I do overindulge on the wine. It calms me down. I get quite anxious when he's not around. And without the children being here, the house felt like a mausoleum, if you know what I mean. I find when I'm home alone, well, it suddenly gets so noisy at night. And everything that goes bump in the night makes me jump out of my skin, rather. When Ralph's here, I'm not bothered by any of these noises. But when I'm on my own, it's a whole different ball game altogether. And it's very difficult to sleep without wine in my system to help steady my nerves. But I assure you, everything that happened to me tonight was real." "We don't doubt that something happened to you, Anita. You're in a dreadful state, aren't you?" said my mother kindly, encouraging Anita to go on with her story, and reassuring her, in not so many words, that no matter how outlandish her story might appear, we would almost certainly believe her. Anita looked grateful to have a listening audience that wasn't dismissing what she was saying out of hand, but I have to admit I did privately wonder if she'd drunk far too much and allowed her imagination to play tricks on her, as being home alone in a noisy house in the middle of the night can be very disquieting, and Anita Sandelson lived in a very large house that was much older than our house was. But even so, she did claim that something had chased her from her house through the woods, so I wondered where her story would take us, and I was more than a little intrigued. Was it possible that this monstrous thing she claimed had chased her through the woods was a hallucination of her own creation, brought on by drinking way too much? That I could not help but feel was a definite possibility. Another rather awkward question that clawed at my mind was what had possessed a woman like Anita, predisposed to being terribly afraid of being left at home on her own, to go and leave the safety of our house in the middle of the night like that, and go wandering about out of doors. I wouldn't do it myself, if I was inclined to be as nervous as she was. Anita helped herself to the box of tissues my mother presented her with. She blew her nose hard into the paper. She looked up at us all apologetically, for I think she felt rather bad for waking us up all at this ungodly hour of the morning. But we were beyond caring now. We wanted to know exactly what had happened to Anita, for no one got this dishevelled for no reason at all, even if they had enjoyed a tad too much alcohol to drink. Anita regarded us all through narrowing eyes, as if she was testing the waters as to whether she could trust us or not. "Well, it doesn't feel real, but it happened. I promise you it did. And it wasn't the drink that made me see this thing. This thing was so real. I remember him so vividly. The trouble is, I'm not sure you're going to believe my story. It sounds so dreadfully far-fetched, ridiculous even. And if I recount it all to you, I think you're going to think I'm a very, very silly, overwrought woman. You might think it's the drink talking, but I assure you it's not. This grotesque beast was after me. I'm telling you it was. You have no idea how terrifying this thing was. Oh, my God, the teeth on it! There are no words. It was chasing me through the woods." Anita's eyes widened. "I thought it was going to kill me. I'm telling you, it was looking at me with these furiously enraged eyes, as if it was desirous to rip me to shreds. I'm not exaggerating. It was drooling. There was so much spittle on this thing. I could never dream up such a creature in my own imagination, I assure you. I know what I saw was real." "Never you mind, Anita. Whatever it was you claim was chasing you, it didn't kill you, did it?" said my mother. "Why don't you start at the very beginning?" I could see that, much like myself and my brother, my mother was beginning to doubt Anita's story, and was wondering if her friend had panicked because her husband was away, and had gone out of doors possibly to investigate a strange noise she'd heard, and suddenly imagined that she was being chased by a monster in the woods, and had run off in a terrible panic. "Tell us what happened, Anita. You're safe now," said my mother. "Nothing bad is going to happen to you here, I assure you." Anita took a big sip of her cocoa, pausing for a brief moment. All eyes in the kitchen were fixed steadily on her as she told us her story, and when she did, you could have heard a pin drop in our kitchen. "Well, I'm a light sleeper most of the time, especially when Ralph is away. I have to say the house has been so dreadfully quiet during the day, and I've been mudding around on my own doing the chores, and without the children around, because they're staying with their grandparents, I felt all the more vulnerable being in the home all on my own. As I was saying, at night, my house unfortunately makes all kinds of groans and strange noises, and they can become quite disquieting, so much so that it's impossible to get any good quality sleep. I just felt so unsettled all the time, imagining that someone was there, when they probably weren't. I kept seeing dark shadows in my bedroom in the corner of my eyes, but I know, of course, it was a trick of the light. But, without Rolf around, I just can't seem to relax." "Well, that would make perfect sense to me," said my father kindly. "You're alone in your house, Anita, and your house is a lot older than ours, and that's really saying something. Our house can also be awfully noisy at night. We've had people staying at our house swearing the place is haunted, but it's not, of course. It can be airy, though, at night, and doubtless your house, being so much older than ours, is much the same. How can I say this? But old houses are notorious for making strange noises. And when you're rattling around in a big house on your own at night, the noises can be deafening. I'm the first to appreciate that. As for the dark shadows you see at night, well, it happens to all of us, does it not? Of course you're bound to think you're seeing something that isn't actually there, as unfortunately, when we're afraid, our imaginations can be our very worst enemy. I know that because my 2 boys and my wife here were having a panic attack when you banged on the door this morning, at an ungodly hour, if you don't mind my saying so." "Oh, I'm so sorry about that," said Anita apologetically. "I didn't mean to alarm anyone. I was just so desperately afraid, so frightened this thing would come after me." "No need to apologize, Anita," said my father politely. "You know I had a friend once who lived close to an airport. He got very used to the aeroplanes flying over his family home. He barely noticed them at all. He didn't visit his family for many years once he'd left the place, and the first night he returned home he couldn't sleep a wink, because the noises of those aircrafts flying over his old house was deafening to him. And yet in the past those very same noises he heard, night after night, didn't impact him at all. I suspect he barely noticed them until he went away for a while and returned. Your being alone in your house is going to make every noise you hear exceedingly disquieting." "Well, I guess that does make perfect sense to me. I was on tenterhooks, I've got to admit that to you," said Anita Sanderson. "I've been acutely aware of every noise I hear. I wasn't sleeping well, and then Badger was making a huge noise in the kitchen downstairs, and Badger isn't exactly a noisy dog. He's deaf in one ear, you see, so he's never given us much trouble during the night. But last night it was like he instinctively knew something was going on outside the farmhouse, and for him to bark in the way he did, well, it was very unusual. As I said, he's deaf in one ear, and yet he could sense that something wasn't right. And when I say he was barking loudly, that's an understatement. He was actually going ballistic. So I rushed downstairs into the kitchen and noticed that he was furiously scratching at the back door, as if he wanted to get out. That was when I knew instinctively something was out there that had got his attention. So I told him to quieten down, which he did, and I stood at the door and listened myself. That was when I heard the most ungodly squawking sound, coming from the chicken coop. It was absolutely terrifying, let me tell you. I was shaking like a leaf, and thinking how typical it was that Rolf so happened to be away when this happened. My first instinctive thought was that a fox or a coyote had somehow managed to get into the chicken coop and was attacking my chickens, and I was not going to allow that carnage to happen under any circumstance. So I quickly grabbed Rolf's rifle and dashed out of the kitchen in my nightdress and slippers. I'm not intimidated by coyotes or foxes, even though I admit the dark does intimidate me. I didn't even bother to put on my dressing gown, you know. I was in a rush to get rid of that predator that was attacking my chickens, and I was determined that I'd kill it if I found it. I left Badger in the kitchen. I didn't want him to get caught in the crossfire if I was to shoot at the fox or coyote that was attacking my chickens. But I'm not exactly a good shot at the very best of times, and my husband can testify to that. I dashed out of the back door of the kitchen, running to the chicken coop as fast as I could, with my torch in my hand to guide me, because it was very dark out there. When I got to the chicken coop, the wire had been torn wide open. There was a massive hole, and the chickens were in disarray, squawking in terror. 3 chickens were already dead. Their heads were torn off and lying on the ground. It was carnage, let me tell you. A devastating sight. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Anita," said my mother sympathetically, putting a kind hand on the woman's narrow shoulders. "I know how fond you are of your chickens. Did you see what was attacking them by any chance?" "Not at first," said Anita, growing decidedly pale, as the colour suddenly left her face. "I didn't know what to do. There was no sign of the guilty culprit. But I felt watched, if you know what I mean. Almost as if the fox or the coyote or whatever was responsible for attacking my chickens was surreptitiously waiting in the wings for me to go back indoors so he could come back to vandalize the chicken coop and behead all my remaining chickens. You see, there is a red fox population out here in the Cascades, but you probably know that already. But they are becoming significantly more rare. Me personally, I've witnessed a red fox sniffing around our coop with a great deal of interest. So I thought I was dealing with a fox, and I decided I was going to bring the chickens into the kitchen and sort out the coop in the morning, making it much more robust so it couldn't happen again. I didn't want any more carnage. I know what foxes are like when they get into a coop. They bite all the chickens' heads off and leave feathers scattered all over the place, and it's absolute carnage. I decided the only thing to do was to go back into the house, to get Badger, and, of course, to open the kitchen door so that I could allow the chickens to come into the house. I went back to the kitchen door, which was closed at this point, but that was when I saw him standing on the step outside the kitchen door. I thought what I was seeing could not be real. I had to be dreaming this, because it was just so ludicrous to be seeing something like this in our reality. He had been eating, but he stopped eating for a moment and just stood and just stared at me. I think we sort of made eye contact together. I even forgot about the firearm I was carrying in my hand because I thought that I was dreaming lucidly. I rubbed my eyes a couple of times and even pinched myself to check I was awake, and was horrified to find that this was not a dream. "So you saw this strange creature?" my mother asked. "I saw the thing that attacked my chickens, and I assure you of this, it was not a coyote, nor was it a fox. It was a grotesque monster. There are no other words to describe it. It was horrifying. Never seen anything like it in my life. And if you told me such a thing existed in our reality, I would tell you you were stark raving mad. But this thing was real." "What exactly do you mean by a monster?" my mother asked, giving my father a quick sideways glance. Anita Sanderson trembled as she told us about the idiosyncratic creature that she had seen. "He was standing on the front step of my kitchen, ripping away the feathers from one of my dead chickens and chomping parts of the chicken he had defeathered. There were feathers everywhere, let me tell you, all over the kitchen step. He was eating raw chicken and bones together. But he only stopped eating when he saw me approaching the kitchen door. I almost wonder if he was standing there deliberately to scare me. I couldn't be sure. I could hear that horrible crunching sound he was making, that you often hear when your dog is chewing a bone. There was blood all over this thing's jaws. It was dribbling down his face, along with large globules of spittle that rather reminded me of aloe vera gel. That was how thick and translucent it was. Absolutely vile, disgusting. And the sharp teeth on this thing, well, there are no words." "What exactly did this thing look like, Anita?" my father asked solemnly. "He looked to be like a wolf man. There's no other way to describe him. Half man, half wolf, perhaps. He was covered in patchy thatches of dark brown hair. I rather suspect he might have had mange. There were bones sticking through his flesh. He was emaciated and scrawly, and I think I don't think he was in the best of health, so to speak. But he was powerful and reasonably sizable, so to speak. He stood up quite tall on 2 feet. I think he might have been 6 foot, perhaps. He had the head of a wolf, and I noticed he had 2 rows of very sharp teeth and horrible, horrible red eyes that looked almost demonic. So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.